Hey, friend, welcome back to the continuation of our journey moving from anxiety to peace. We're in a new week together. And if you haven't yet, I want to encourage you to track along with the message series that we did as a church called The Promise of Peace, that speaks about God's peace from the angle of a promise that He made to us through His Word that says, "You will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast because they trust in you." That's from Isaiah 26:3. That's the promise that God makes to our life. Now, in connection with that, we're looking at the book of 1 Peter, and today we've got some very interesting words that Peter gives to the early churches. He says this in 1 Peter 2:18, "You who are slaves must submit to your master with all respect. Do what they tell you, not only if they're kind and reasonable, but also when they are cruel. For God is pleased when, conscious of His will, you patiently endure unjust treatment." Of course, you get no credit for being patient if you're beaten for doing wrong, but if you suffer for doing good and endure it patiently, God is pleased with you. Now, one of the things that is often hard to remember when we read the Bible is that the Bible was not written to us. It was written for us, but it wasn't written to us. So God ultimately had a plan for His Word to impact our lives. But Peter was writing in the first century to a group of people, many of whom were a part of a system of slavery. Some like what we would consider slaves that you've seen in American history. Others more like a servant that was paying off a debt and then afterwards would be let go to be free. One thing that we can be certain of that's very important, there are people historically that have used passages like this to say that the Bible is condoning slavery. That is not what Peter is doing here. Peter is speaking into circumstance that for many of the readers was not going to change quickly. And he wanted them to understand, how do I change my perspective when I can't change my circumstance? Let me say that again. How do I change my perspective when I can't change my circumstance? And this verse can be applied in any context where you find yourself with a boss that's hard to work for, maybe with somebody in your family that you feel like mistreats you, from your spouse or your parents or your kids, or somebody that you just feel like they're putting pressure on you that they shouldn't, or saying things to you that are harmful with their words. And all of that, of course, those of us who are in mediocre level difficulty can't relate to somebody in slavery. But the principle of seeing the situation or circumstance that we're in and recognizing that every time I submit or I endure in difficulty when I'm mistreated, God somehow is able to use that for good in my life. And I'll just be really frank with you, this is hard for me. Like I don't know how many personality tests you've done, but my personality, when it comes to being mistreated, there's a sense of justice when I'm mistreated or somebody else is mistreated. Like I gotta make sure they know you don't treat people like that. Even like a bad customer service experience, like you call in and they mistreat you, and maybe you're like that. Maybe you can relate to that it's really hard for you. Others of you, you're like my wife Stacy, man, she is one of the most gracious people when it comes to being mistreated. She has this profound character strength in the midst of being mistreated to let God use it to form and shape her character. So this has been a journey for me. And part of what I have to do in these moments is say, okay, God, what are you trying to form in me in a circumstance that's difficult where I feel mistreated? What are you trying to form in me? And how can I make sure that in the circumstance that is not going to change, that might still be chained to me, how do I make sure that I'm not chained to a perspective, or I'm not chained to bitterness, or I'm not chained to offense, yet that I'm able to let those things go so that I can live free and become a forgiving person and become a kind person and become somebody that lets mistreatment shape me to become more like Jesus. Jesus was mistreated all the way to the cross, and it says that He was silent on the way. Like He didn't speak a word of defense. And so today, I just want you to know, friend, if you're being mistreated or you've been mistreated, I'm sorry. In no way are these few minutes to make light of that. And at the same time, God can use that to strengthen you. He can be with you in it. He can be with you in the pain. And he can use it to form you, to form us into gracious people, into people that are loving and kind and sweet, that the pressure makes us more like Jesus. What's the difficulty in your life today that God is trying to use to form in you more of the character of Jesus? I encourage you to think about that. And I look forward to being back with you tomorrow.